of podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the king of podcasts. Back once again with episode number 184 of the Broadcasters Podcast. This is KOP, and thanks for being with me tonight as I record another episode going through a number of various things. We talk radio a little bit tonight. Syndication. And I've talked about this many times here on the program, but I also brought it up on one of my podcasting series. We're going to go more in depth on some changes that happened this week in the world of radio. And that's the nationalization of radio. Now, we already know that talk radio, there's already the form where, you know, most of the conservative talk radio stations, of which you have one in every market. They have shows that are mostly not local. And there was a time, maybe 15, 20 years ago, where you might have some local shows embedded in what you were doing. But, you know, because of the consolidation, the deregulation, and the fact that it was much cheaper to go in here on these stations where sometimes you would either get a barter or they would have to go and pay a certain amount for certain shows to be run on said networks based on who owned them, that they would basically be nationalized. You'd hear the same show live in most markets and there would just be no change. Maybe a little bit of local news in between, a little bit of locality, but really, no. That's it. We know that radio is going to get the same thing eventually to music because we know that iHeart Radio and other stations have already been syndicating morning shows to various markets. They've been doing that for a long time. But when it was started happening more, it wasn't because stations were saying, oh, we want to get this show and put it on. No. The shows were being forced in favor of removing local programming. So when a show comes on, there might have been a local show that was on before that was doing pretty good and, you know, got some ratings and got some praise and people were listening to it. But because of cost-cutting measures, those local morning shows were removed in favor of syndicated morning shows. Now, not all of this is going to happen in this particular end for music radio, but there's a lot of music radio stations where they already have a set show available. Now, in some markets, that's what they're going to do. You know, there's only various markets of urban stations that will not have Steve Harvey or Ricky Smiley or, you know, it's shows like that. There's not going to be stations that will not have John Boy and Billy or Bobby Bones in the country format or Brook and Jubal. Or now it's not Brook and Jubal anymore. I forgot they broke up. Or if it's, you know, your top 40 format where you have Ryan Seacrest or Elvis Duran or pick some others. That's just what they're going to do. And in some cases, some shows are going to get brought into the forefront where they're going to go ahead and make it where, well, there's nothing that identifies a station as that station or the person that's going to be hosting that time shift, that time slot. It's not going to be somebody that is in that studio. We know about voice tracking, but this is actual programming, time slots, and it's just the same thing everywhere without any kind of individuality whatsoever. That's where we're at right now. With that said, nationalization. This is something that has already happened over in the UK and then other European stations and other places around the world where they do have this idea of when you don't have individual cities that are really identified so much as more than you have a national radio station and then all those stations or all those frequencies run the same station and the same host and the same format with some various local programming embedded in between with the same branding. Right, and that's all they're going to do. So Audacy, Audacy, chose to go and do that this past week, and they implemented a new top 40 radio strategy. Now, I can go ahead and go back to what they did and what was being put together and talk about that. We could go ahead and do that already and what was going to be planned out. I could go ahead and tell that story and explain what they were going to do. Because this story came up about a month ago, and they were already talking about the plans of reorganizing. So what I can do first is talk about how this all started. About 4 weeks ago, we started hearing things where changes will be made to many of the top 40 radio stations around the country in major markets. This is from RadioInsight.com back on June 27th. The former company known as Entercom was going to initiate a reorganization of its programming at its alternative and country stations. This kind of thing already happened with Cumulus Media by creating the NASH brand for country stations in various markets. This was one of the few that were trying to do it was a full branding, which never did work. It was a failed product. And there have been other stations that tried to do the same thing. I remember back when grunge was still, I think, early 90s, we had a format called Z-Rock. And various stations tried to run it, and that failed. And nationalization has not been performed well. I mean, there are some national formats that just run on smaller stations when they have no way to run any of the programming. The True Oldies channel is a great example of that Scott Shannon runs. But this is the same idea. Now, alternative country stations under the Audacy brand went and reorganized last September. And the changes included national midday and evening shows at their country outlets. And although alternative stations with the most jocks being heard on 3 or 4 stations, plus national evening and overnight shows. So the alternative stations were getting more nationalized. Meanwhile, the country was going to just get a couple of shots where the morning show would still be what originally was planned. And then, as I said, midday and evening, those are the time slots they want to go and work on. And in the top 40 formats, in some cases, that's what they're actually doing now. So roughly the middays, like 10 to 2, 11 to 3, or 7 to 11. That's the idea. Even though some stations might have been run differently. Both also had new specialty weekend shows created and moved smaller programming teams overseeing each format. And because of this, a number of people started losing their jobs. We had a restructuring of one station in Los Angeles, where the AMP brand was dropped in favor of the Now brand, launched at 97.1 in Los Angeles in April. And the alternative format, you had multiple stations drop their priorities for alt. And some of the CHRs might get the Noun brand, which has not happened yet, but that could eventually happen at some point. And some legendary stations, if this idea goes through, will basically go and take away the legacy of a number of heritage radio stations, as a matter of fact. Let's just put it like that. That's what definitely will happen. Okay, now, this plan has already been made, and then iHeart Radio is going to do the same idea, where that they already had cut too deep over the past couple of years, and they're looking to refill lost positions, and that they're creating new shows and all, and they're trying to go through things to try to retcon the mistakes that they have made. So there's part of that. So iHeartRadio has already done this kind of mess before, but they're not doing that here. But Audacy's trying to do something different. They're trying to be innovative. And this is being innovative, meanwhile taking away jobs and trying to, just make it where there's no such thing as local radio on these stations. So they're going to try this anyway. Now, so what happened is that about 16 top 40 radio stations in all major markets. I got to go look for the story and real quickly bring up what they did here so that you know what they decided to go and do. I want to pull this story up that I had pulled up last week to explain what they were going to be doing. So last week, they went ahead and started cutting staff. We talked about that. And here's what actually happened. So there would be now 5 regional programming presidents of programming and 5 regional brand managers overseeing multiple stations. And that there would be 2 shows that would be run on multiple markets as a nationalized format. And we're talking about pretty big markets. We're talking about Las Vegas, Miami, Chicago, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Sacramento, and then some other markets like Milwaukee and some mid-sized markets in Buffalo, Chattanooga, Rochester, and Norfolk, Virginia, and Greenville, South Carolina. So that's the kind of idea that we're going to do on this. And a number of people lost jobs as a result of this, with numbers of years under their belt of working in that said market. It's just what they decided to go and do. And so now you have these two time slots being covered. Is this going to be a sign of something more to come? Well, I know there's not a lot of news on the radio industry that we can't really get our hands on, but there was a lot of talk on message boards. And there's one particular message board that's pretty active called RadioDiscussions.com. And there was a board post from a pretty common poster called the BigA. And I thought that what he wrote in a post regarding the Audacy CHR lineups change, I thought what he actually said was actually pretty on point. And I normally wouldn't take a message board post, but somebody else's commentary coming out like this, pretty well sound information. This comment is on point. Let's go ahead and read it. Here it is. Quote, "The music business, especially in contemporary hit radio, CHR, is targeting social media, TikTok, and streaming Spotify. That's where they're focusing a lot of their promotion and the new releases. Why? Because of the mass audience those platforms deliver, and the mass audience creates royalties that pay labels and artists. That doesn't exist in FM radio." Listen to that point. As I said, there are multiple ways for radio to monetize themselves, but they have not done a thing where they don't bundle their live stream and their terrestrial format programming to get the best bang for their buck. They're just creating multiple pipeline streams to try to get them to monetize. And then the same thing goes for the pre-roll ads that run on their respective apps. So if it's iHeart Radio or if it's Audacy or if it's whatever, they're all going to do that, trying to create some way to get more money. And as a result, we've talked about this on the show about record labels not promoting to radio anymore. And radio suffered as a result. So they're not the place to go. First of all, it's not the place to go for some advertisers because they're not going to get people listening because the programming is lacking. They are behind. And this guy right here, or this person, says it exactly right. So let me read that again. The music business is targeting social media and streaming. They're focusing a lot of their promotion on their promotion there and the new releases because the mass audience those platforms deliver and the mass audience creates royalties that pay labels and artists. So they'd rather go ahead and let the fans basically pay the artists when radio should be doing that for themselves. It used to be for the music, for the record labels and for the artists, the royalties they would make from radio should, and the promotion that radio would entail for their concerts should make a difference, but it does not right now. That's the problem. We saw earlier this year with Olivia Rodrigo. I talked about her very beginning of January when that song Driver's License came out, and all of a sudden, what a year she's had. And the album Sour has sold hand over foot. Her big hit was delivered to Spotify, not FM. It was quick, efficient, and productive, and dare I say viral. Because it didn't take much time after January 6th, I think the song got released, that right there, just before the song came out, that song got so much buzz, and then all of a sudden it went to Spotify, and then ka-ching, that song just rose. For a debut single from an artist that, might be a little bit familiar to some people, but for the most part, I didn't know about her. I wasn't a Disney fan, but some Disney fans would have known about her. And this came out, and all of a sudden, 8 weeks of number one for a debut single. I mean, that's just, and any song that she puts out now, she has a number of songs right now that are still charting. Deja Vu and Good For You are still charting right now. And what's happened? Well, those songs came out about after the album came out, about 8 weeks ago. And just now, radio's finally getting on top of the bandwagon because those two songs right now are in major rotation, heavy rotation on every radio station around the country. But they're late to the game, as always. Now, back to this post. So how does radio compete in this environment? Channeling its national platform. In iHeart's case, their streaming platform is among the largest in the world. Audacy owns its own streaming platform, too, which was also formerly Radio.com, by the way. But they needed to create exclusive content to drive people to it. Radio companies have access to the same national, international platforms that Spotify has. They just need to harness that power and demonstrate to the music industry that they can deliver ears and revenue for artists and labels because they're going to get money back. There used to be a time where the record labels used to go ahead and spend money on advertising with them. Or they would make a deal to have where the records will be sold. But they don't have that anymore. But there's nothing like that right now at all. Anytime where you're listening to music and you can advertise new artists and new albums. And they're not doing that at all. That's what it's all about. Redirecting resources so radio is a player in the same market with Spotify. Now, BigA here continues to go ahead and really just hit radio where it hurts. If you're a young fan, you're not attached to your radio the way people were 40 years ago. You're online chatting with your friends, sharing new music, and engaging with the artists directly. You do not need radio DJs as a middleman. You can speak directly to your favorite artist on Twitter. So the rules have changed. And by the way, the two new disc jockeys that are actually, or the disc jockeys are going to be the air talents. They're going to be on these various 16 stations on Audacy's radio, chain of stations. They're going to supposed to be bringing in some artists to be in featured interviews that will be exclusive to these stations as well. But like I said, social media, they can go ahead and go right to them, whether it's TikTok or whether it's Instagram or whatever. The rules have changed, and radio needs to be in that process somehow. It's not easy, but it's not going to happen if a radio station is only focusing on one market because the music environment is much bigger. So the idea of nationalizing would help to kind of create that idea right there, that the focus is not on one market, but that you're actually bridging out to multiple markets. That you're bridging out to all major top 50 markets in the country, or top 100 markets, whatever. That's kind of the idea. But there's no easy way for that because the artists, unless you're going to go back out and they're going to be performing at a particular venue near that neighborhood, otherwise they're not going to really take the time. The record labels are not going to take the time to promote an album with anybody and send them on the road to these stations to go ahead and be interviewed live. No, they're not going to do it anymore. That's gone. It's over. That's not going to happen anymore. And that's just the way it is. But I believe this story is important because of the fact that I think we're going to see more of this happen. This is a going trend. This is going to be an evolving trend that we're going to see more of, which I thought was going to happen. Now, I said on one of my podcasting I was going to go ahead and listen to these stations and see what they were like. So there were two stations that before this consolidation really got so bad. Two stations I was really a big fan of, especially because of the heritage of these two stations from back in the 80s becoming prominent. You had B96, WBBM, and WPOW Power 96. B96 in Chicago and Power 96 in Miami. These stations individually had their own feel and flavor, amazing formats, and just became mainstays in the 80s and just re-identified radio in so many different ways. Because they were two hubs of where dance music and various music of hip-hop or freestyle and just various music of various markets, because Miami and Chicago were such hotbeds for music. And these two stations were two beacons where the music really flourished with some great DJs. Well, I'm talking about mix turntable DJs and air talent that really put things out there, and they were able to get the clubs, they were able to get the audience out there to catch in and engage this music. And they're both now homogenized. They've been watered down. I mean, whatever Power 96 was is no longer. B96 has been the same way. They lost the individuality. They lost the identity that they actually had before. They've been watered down and they've been nationalized. Because, first of all, B96 and Power 96 used to be rhythmic contemporary hit radio. So they would actually play crossover hits. Well, it's not like that anymore. Both of these stations are mainstream hit radio stations. In the same vein, one of the stations that was very popular when Infinity sold their stations to Intercom, I think it was, and there was a station in Orlando, WJHM 102 Jams, another legendary station with great air talent, great music, and identifying Orlando as such a hotbed as well. And then that's one of the stations they decided to go and flip to contemporary hit radio out of rhythmic or out of urban, basically, and moved it to a hit top 40 station. For what, I don't know. Well, because there was another station that was kind of taking away from that. But to go ahead and abandon, to let that station go. And then they quickly, that station did not last long as a hit radio station. Then they flipped it because you put it as a hit radio station to compete against a heritage contemporary hit station in WXXL, XO 106.7. That's been around since the 80s as well. And you're not going to compete with them. The station just does too well. And all of a sudden, and you would think it would do good having a pop formatted station, having two in the same market, but no. So instead, they decided to split the alternative market by playing active rock, much like the iHeart Radio counterpart WJRR, and decided to go and do that. And then now you have two alternative stations because now the alt format is on this station in Orlando. That's what they decided to do. So they're doing it to multiple formats. This is a smaller, this might not have as many stations, but they have enough of an impact to direct the mindset of an iHeartRadio or a Cumulus or other companies to do the same thing, because they're all going to look at that and say, let's see if this works. Because if it does, and the numbers go up for these stations on their individual Nielsen digital people meter PPM ratings, if they go up in these various time slots, these day parts, if you will, then they're going to say, you know what, let's do it to the rest of the stations. Let's get rid of the morning show. We'll put something else there. Let's put something else in afternoon drive, and they'll just change it up. It's those stations. I listen to some other stations, and I also did my normal thing where every couple of months I look at the formats of these stations, and I look through the media base logs to find out what are the stations playing other new music that's out there, what's viral, what's playing on Spotify, Apple Music, or other places. And I looked to see what there was. And it's a hodgepodge. What all these stations do are the same thing in top 40 radio now. They're playing maybe the top 10, 20 songs, and then they're just playing the hit. They're playing past hits. They're not playing past hits of the last 5 years. They're not playing maybe some recurring songs from artists that are already very prominent on the charts. So you have Bruno Mars or Ariana Grande or Justin Bieber. No, they're going way back. They're going way back. They're going back to the 2000s. So if you want to hear Usher and the song Yeah, you want to hear, Flo Rida's Low, you want to hear, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg's The Next Episode. You really want to hear that? Like old songs, 15, 20 years old? Is that the right idea? Competing with songs that are new? It's just a complete miss. Man, if I was programming top 40 today, yes, you need gold records. Yes, you need recurrence. And you need to bring some songs back. Sure. But you can do that better. But what they're doing with their research is just saying, you know what, we're just going to have to go through bona fide hits, and just certain songs do not have the staying power to play all over. So we're going to put all these older songs out there. We can't just, cobble together 10, 12, 15 songs in an hour that are practically new songs and play that as a format on the station. We can't do that now. And their argument is, well, there's not enough new music coming out. Yeah, there is. You just refuse to play it. You have this irretrievable expectation of what records need to be and how they need to be a certain a certain way. That they must meet some kind of criteria, and they must be these bona fide hits that are from stars that you know and you trust. And the record labels have to put some money behind it. So if it's a Republic or Interscope or Columbia or whatever. If they were in touch, they would be doing a better job of seeing what songs are up that they need to be playing instead of being behind on that. Now, that doesn't mean they need to be doing everything like that. So like a song, like artists like BTS or others that are really, spiking up sales because there's a whole lot of gimmickry being done for their songs to get put up the top of the Billboard charts. That's one thing. But those songs do get played a little bit, but not as much. And that's because, they probably see what the writing on the wall is right there because they see that's just a cash grab. Okay, by Big Hit Entertainment and Columbia Records. Yeah, rig the system, play the system, why not? So radio doesn't have to worry about those people, but you need to be worrying about others. They relate to a number of artists. They're always like that. And then all of a sudden, then they latch on to artists that become big pop stars all of a sudden. And they're like, oh, we're going to put their songs out quick. So when Billie Eilish first came out with her album, they weren't touching it. Well, then until Bad Guy came out, and then, they would play a little bit of some of the earlier songs, and then the album came out, and then she just started blowing up. And now they are trying to go and push her songs out there as much as they can. So they will be loyal to an artist because, well, they'll come for the festivals, they'll come for the things they're asking for. So that kind of, scratch our back, scratch yours, that's what they're going to do. Post Malone, they've always been a champion for, so that when the song Motley Crue comes out, they're playing it automatically. Ed Sheeran, same thing. It's what radio does. It's, playing favorites. Instead of playing what's actually out there that's popular, being a beacon for what songs are actually new and hot and trends that don't know what they're doing. And they're late to the game when it comes to social media. They're late to the game when it comes to podcasting. They've been late to everything. There's no forward thinking in radio. I mean, except for some of the talent out there that they have nothing else to do. They're not going to get any help in terms of any kind of promotions for their shows. Like they're on an island of their own, trying to do something to get their shows to be popular. They're not getting paid much, and they're trying to do whatever they can to market and monetize themselves, create some kind of a character to get themselves noticed. And I appreciate their ambition to try to do so. I appreciate that. Let me go move along to a story that I saw from RadioFacts.com. More on the radio here because I thought this story from Kevin Ross was quite good. I don't want to read the whole thing, but there's quite a bit he writes here about can radio survive the digital apocalypse. Right off the bat, he talks about how he's seen podcasting, audiobooks, music streaming, and online voiceover portals explode and completely change the broadcast industry. And he was stunned to see radio corporations seemingly sit idly by as if it would not affect them. Well, that's what the digital disruption was like anyway. He goes through and talks about some history where we're going to go and pass back there. And there was a time where he says that radio was the liaison between the music, stars, and listeners. DJs were the narrators or the hosts that brought the music to the listeners. With black radio, because what he basically does talk about is urban radio in specific. He says that community service programs and news were the highlights on radio stations. So listeners have direct access to the stars via social media, even to the point they can have conversations with them sans the radio middleman. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, that was unheard of, but that's not at all. The process right now that's going on is the DJs are now moving up the ranks at a radio station. Then there's no more DJs moving up the ranks now. That you have an air talent start as a part-timer, work the dreaded graveyard shift, then get nights or middays, then get the coveted afternoon drive show or mornings. But syndication's changed all that. So there's only so much room for people to do what they can do. Then he talks about the on-roads of podcasting. And he says that, DJs are generally one-trick ponies, so it's not surprising to see many of them not jump on board with the burgeoning, more financially beneficial technology right before them. They wanted to be on the air or nothing at all. And that was about 10 years ago, pretty much right there. While they may have some luck, these people would be coming into the industry without training, but with leverage. That's not going to be cheap. But the really sad thing about this is they will make more money than trained jocks who have been working at the craft for many years because the leverage they bring is followers and influence. It's very unfair and a double-edged sword because radio corporations are uber protective of their brands. So radio DJs have been under strict rules as what they can post on social media and how they have to represent the station. On the other hand, influencers are picked because of what they've done on their own social media and which has few rules. This, by and large, is what has allowed them to get followers and what has kept radio DJ follower numbers much leaner. He goes in and talks about some various DJs and what they've been able to do. The question is, he says, is that do the influencers want to be on a corporate leash when they are making so much money running their own social media channels as well as dealing directly with corporations and ad agencies? Radio likes to have control of the money. and the town on the air, but in these cases, but that's all will be gone, and a smart influencer will make sure their contract allows them to continue to operate as an independent entity. So where does it leave the DJs? Because the DJs 20 years ago were the influencers. And he makes a perfect point right here, because that's exactly what they were. When there was no social media, radio hosts could influence. They could be the cool kids, and people would go and talk about them and really make a big point. Because if you think about it, some of the nighttime disc jockeys that are out there that were around, 20, 30 years ago, they would have absolutely flourished in social media at their time. But, it wasn't here. And you had to work really hard to get the audience to go ahead and follow you along with what you were doing. So corporate radio stations have a choice to make between advertisers, syndication / influencers, and DJs. DJs are probably not going to prosper in this case. Why do radio stations play the same song so much? The portable people meter, Nielsen. They have to play the research hits to keep people listening and not changing to competitor stations. But they're not worried about streaming, which is what their real competition is. Why they're going after competitor stations, I don't know why. Because most stations don't have competitors in their various markets. Now, the argument about not enough new music out there. And Kevin Ross says his. That's a complaint I've heard more times than I care to remember. The truth is there's a ton of new music out there. The record labels produce it all the time. Independent artists produce it all the time. And for the longest time, neither had an outlet because radio wasn't playing them. Then came streaming. So he puts up a chart of what people search for online when it comes to new music discovery. And it was created by RadioFacts via ubersuggest.com in July 2021. Spotify, Pandora, and YouTube Music dominate, and listeners now have options where they don't have to depend on the radio anymore and don't have to hear the same songs over and over. They can create their own playlists and hear their favorite songs any way they want. In this, they showed, I don't know how many, what's the impressions here, but Pandora and Spotify are neck and neck, dominating where listeners have options. You would think this would be a signal for radio to make a change for the music playlists to add more songs. Unfortunately, it's not. PPM is dominating the radio industry, and if they want the revenue they have to play familiar songs. They have to play familiar songs to keep the revenue. So the radio is pretty much stuck when it comes to the music. They are forced to think of ways to keep listeners engaged in other ways, which is becoming more and more challenging. So he asked the question, what will happen? Like, what's going to become of radio and what they have to do? Well, Audacy is showing us an example of what they're going to try to do to counteract the digital disruption. Let's just consolidate it all. Let's just nationalize it all. And let's just start saving some more money. That's what it sounds like. But radio is not a place where people are going these days. It's not where the influencers are. Because the truth is, if radio was a flourishing medium, you would have diversity, equity, and inclusion across the board because you would have various talents out there of various persuasions, various gender, race, equality, all across the board. And you know where the influencers would be? They would have shows on the radio. Or they would be playing music on the radio. If influencers could be DJs, I think there would be some that would be definitely interested. Because the same young people that want to be on the air, that want to be in front of something, that's where it used to be, is radio. And with influencing, you have to be in front of the camera and you have to be doing things. But still, you notice that a lot of these people, either on TikTok or on YouTube, doing shows on video, they're all using radio equipment, just like myself. We're using good radio equipment that's used for podcasting. We're using some of the same quality equipment that's out there that radio DJs can use as well. And that's what it comes down to. They're getting to be playing radio without being on the terrestrial radio that goes out the transmitters and goes out and goes into a local market at 50 or 100,000 watts or whatever it might be. So is question about what will happen to radio. In talking to contacts at the record labels and other entities, radio is no longer the behemoth it once was. It's still important, but instead of being the outlet, it's now one of the outlets. Yeah, it's the secondary. So radio, like I said a few months ago, I called it a flea market. You know what it also is? So there's movie theaters that run movies first run. And then there's value. There used to be those value cinemas where, like, you know, you get some second-rate movie that's already been running for a long time, and then that would be the one that would run at this cinema for like $5. It would be cheap, you know, next to nothing. Well, that's what radio is. They're the hand-me-down. So this song has already been hot and new. Now they're going to get handed down to radio. They're like the redheaded stepchild. Some labels are making over $1 million a day with music streaming. Radio cannot compete with that, and with more outlets and apps appearing online at a rapid pace, the outlet does not look good. And you know where some of that money right there? $1 million a day with music streaming. And you know that these record labels are probably making money with what they're doing in terms of putting out videos or putting out a budget. The budget doesn't include radio, but there was a time when radio was part of the budget. It's not. Corporations see the future, he says. Make no mistake, corporations are doing their best to prepare for the future. iHeart has bought a large percentage of bigger podcast companies that have more to offer to their advertisers in the form of content. Radio One, working on, which is the biggest urban radio programmers, they own a huge gambling casino in Richmond, Virginia, which is pretty much approved for them. And Entercom, or Audacy, looks to be more of a media corporation instead of just a radio outlet. So now they're just consolidating and adding radio as just a property that they have. And they're just doing the bare minimum to make those stations manageable and profitable. And that's it. Radio corporations are seeing less and less value in being called radio. And they are multiplying their positions to captivate a wider broadcast reach. The DJs are the only ones who are in a bad position if they are playing a game and wait and see instead of looking at other ways to monetize or leverage what they do or have done. Radio will never be off the air, but there's a very good chance it will change drastically over the next couple of years. The future of radio will be prosperous as long as the corporations expand their abilities to reach listeners and consumers, but just doing radio may not be enough at this point. It's all going to change. They just don't care. It just doesn't matter to them. And I can understand why they want to be that way. But they're media companies just like the other media companies. And they make the same mistakes that the big, major companies like a Viacom or a Comcast, where, their network outlets or cable outlets are underperforming and they're not doing good. And they're consolidating all of them and downsizing them, and you're letting out staff and things like that. They're more worried about streaming. Radio's worried more about podcasting, and your major television outlets, they're providing content for streaming. So they're just not going to do anything really to do much to monetize those. They're just going to hold on to them in their portfolio, when instead they should be let go. Like, there should be room for all these corporations to not be able to hold on to all these companies like this, where radio and television, they might be antiquated mediums, but somebody else could go ahead and revolutionize those stations. TV, radio stations could be re-energized, reinvigorated. Somebody else could be using it for a different thing, and then it could be somebody that will bring eyeballs or ears back to them. But, of course, they're not going to do that. It's just the way it is. So I appreciate that story from Radio Facts. There's a few other stories I want to get into before we can wrap things up. An interesting story that came out from Facebook. They're looking to invest $1 billion in creators for content for Facebook and Instagram. This is a message to go up against TikTok. There's no doubt about it, because TikTok, there's a lot of creators there that are making quite a bit of money right now. Let's go into the story from Deadline.com. This is from last week when I get a chance to go and read this here and bring it up. So they're going to reward creators for content on Facebook and Instagram through 2022. The cash will go to creators who use the platform's tools such as competition with TikTok and YouTube continues to boil. The idea is to reward creators, especially those just starting out, including a new bonus program that pays eligible creators for hitting certain milestones when they use Facebook's tools and provides seed funding for creators to produce their own content. But are you going to really get people interested in going back to Facebook? Once you lose them, it's kind of just done. And I don't know who wants that. Because, I mean, I look at Facebook these days. You know, they did make a pretty big overhaul a couple years ago. It's been okay, but it is not the place I go for a lot of things. Like, if I go to Facebook, it's pretty much just to promote other content. Like, I just go to put content in and rehash it. Otherwise, not really. And that's just the way it is. I'm looking right now, and I'm not so inclined to getting on here and looking for things on Facebook because you can tell the audience is a little bit older. And there's a whole lot more going on, and it does kind of suck. I don't like it. But what are you going to do? We're here, and I would love, you know, if it works out for people and they can find a way to go make something more happen to them overall. I mean, what can you do? I would hope that, I mean, if people are going to go back to that, I just wonder who there is that's really going back to Facebook and Instagram and really making some content, and people are like finding themselves out of their way to go to it. Like, really? I don't know. And I don't see it. Not for me right now, anyway. Now in the story, they say bonuses will help creators understand what content performs best for them while they continue to grow and monetize across their apps. But are people going to be really interested in doing that? So now there are some invitation-only bonuses that are going to be offered. Because the platform will now launch a dedicated place for bonuses within the Instagram app this summer and then Facebook in the fall. It'll bring together initiatives across the company to support creators and is designated to complement a growing suite of monetization tools. Listen, if you don't have a problem going to those platforms, trying to go and bring people over, trying to bring people that have abandoned Facebook in favor of TikTok, why not? Go for it. But I think it doesn't take away from the inferiority of these platforms, and where TikTok just surpasses them with their algorithm and with the ease of their platform altogether. Because to go and put content up is easy. To watch content is very easy. They just have it figured out. So some of the bonuses will include an in-stream bonus, paying an earnings bonus over the next 4 months to select video creators using in-stream ads. The stars bonus, where participating video and gaming creators will receive a monthly bonus for hitting specific stars earning milestones over the next 3 months. An Instagram TV ads bonus, badges in live bonus, Facebook Live, the Reels summer bonus, which is Instagram Reels. They're giving those all out. Doesn't make much of a difference, not to me. And I don't think it's, I mean, still $1 billion is $1 billion, but can they get people to go ahead and really engage? It's not easy. All right, another story I want to bring up here that I thought was very important is Netflix. And that's what was my second, it's like a co-main event story I made in the headlines where Netflix is going to be talked about here too. Let's talk about a story that came out from the Hollywood Reporter. Netflix wants to be the everything app because they are trying to do much like the other big corporations, where Netflix has always been for television. It's been for video, TV and movies. Well, now they want to get into games, podcasts, and TikTok like shorts. So now they're really going much farther, looking for new ways to present content beyond TV screens. So what? Take the Quibi format, then take video games, take the Twitch format, and then podcasts? I don't know. It's a lot. Netflix understands it's never had the dominance on mobile devices that it has on TV screens. When a subscriber plops down on the couch and opens the Netflix app on their TV, they're welcomed with an array of content the service thinks they will want to binge watch. On mobile, when a user may only have 30 seconds or a minute to check their phone, a 2-hour movie simply isn't the right recommendation. So the company wants to change that. Now, this is part of the thing where they actually had a second or quarter earnings report, and they wanted to talk to their investors about what they're going to be doing. Talking about more about doing something to get screen time, not TV time. Now, people do watch Netflix shows and movies on their phones, but as the company noted in their earnings letter, quote, "We believe our share of engagement is even lower on mobile than it is on TV screens. Netflix accounts for only 7% of TV viewing. Netflix says that's why it competes with YouTube, TikTok, and Fortnite more than it does with HBO and Disney+. User time is not infinite. They can only be looking at one screen at a time, and Netflix wants to gobble up as much of that time as possible. So they will enter the gaming space, primarily focus on mobile devices at the start. Then they have the ongoing push in the original podcast and the recent launch of Fast Laughs, which combines the addictive TikTok mobile video format with clips from Netflix's comedy specials. Things begin to come clear. So when a subscriber opens their Netflix app on their iPhone, the company wants to serve them a mobile-first menu of content options that rivals the movies and TV shows it features prominently on the TV glass. Mobile is inherently a different beast than TV. Dominated by TikTok, Instagram, Spotify, Snap, Twitter, and gaming apps, it isn't beholden to one format, with games, podcasts, text, and video all sharing screen space. But this trying to be this all-in-one platform, you know, for Netflix to stay in their lane, what I've heard more people say more than anything else, you're spending so many tens of billions of dollars on content. Just make better content and stay in your lane. Why do we need to go ahead and expand ourselves so far into something where it could actually risk Netflix once again? Netflix already, with the pandemic, they already had survived some issues they had with the subscriber count and be able to go ahead and, you know, withstand the kind of debt they were going to have to go and take care of with the amount of money they were shoveling out for new content. But now the streaming wars have all begun, and now they're in this spot. And now instead of going in and focus on this, they want to just go ahead and expand. And I don't understand this thought process. To put it another way, Netflix is betting that Quibi's basic underlying philosophy was both right and totally wrong. Subscribers want and need different types of content when they're on a train, waiting in line at the store, and sitting in the doctor's office waiting room. So we're going to go with an idea that was a $2 billion idea that got scrapped? And what the hell? I hate to say this, but if they think of taking the idea of Quibi and trying to run with that, something that majorly failed, is that a good idea to go with? I just don't think they should be doing something like this. This is very risky. Now, I understand it's ambitious, and risk-taking is part of the thing that you got to do to be innovative. You know, take chances. But man, this is really, I don't like it. I don't have confidence in it. So they say that simply making premium content shorter isn't enough to feed that itch. Market share in mobile requires more than just shorter videos and needs to have a mobile-first, holistic mindset. CEO Reed Hastings, co-CEO, he says, quote, "The reason we're doing them is to help the subscription service grow and be more important in people's lives." So I would say, really, we're a one-product company with a bunch of supporting elements that help that product give incredible satisfaction for consumers and a monetizing engine for investors. In other words, a fresh mobile experience led by games might be just the thing to keep Netflix growing in markets like North America, where subscription levels are nearing saturation. Yeah, they're reaching their peak. And now they might be getting some subscribers, but some are now starting to drop off. Gaming could also give Netflix optionality by offering a less expensive base tier without games or a more premium offering down the line. Just as Netflix offers mobile-only tiers in some countries, games and other formats could expand that experimentation further. But Netflix supposedly is not expected to rely on games or other mobile-first offerings to make the company money. The ambitions are much more modest than competitors like Google, Apple, and Microsoft, all of which have launched richly funded and well-stocked mobile gaming subscription offerings. But Netflix also has the benefit of being a beloved brand, a place where users expect to be shown content relevant to them, and being the home to popular intellectual properties like Bridgerton, Stranger Things, and The Queen's Gambit. And the app has no advertising or add-ons, both of which are common in the gaming space, but an annoyance to users. Now, they've thought about video games for several years, running up the pros and cons of timing the entry. So the risk is going to be that Netflix, which for years has been a Wall Street darling, thanks to its insatiable growth, games are expensive and complex, and there remain real questions about how it plans to deliver those games to consumers. Will they stream or require downloads? Now, when the fact that you've had big video game publishers like Activision, Electronic Arts, Take-Two, Ubisoft, and Nintendo, they've tried to create compelling mobile content for years, and each has had lasting success only through acquisition. I don't know. I don't know if this is the right direction for them to go ahead and try to do something on themselves. It's not something I would hope they would really follow up on, but they're going to do it anyway. All right, a few other stories I want to bring up here before we wrap things up. Theater owners going after Disney because they put Black Widow on Disney Plus because the kind of money they could have been actually making if it were not for streaming. The National Association of Theater Owners said the decision is responsible for the superhero pick's stunning collapse in the second weekend of the box office. So people went to see it the first week, and then because it's a streaming on a premium on Disney Plus, well, they don't want to go ahead, and people decided not to go and go back for the second week. Because the decision for Black Widow to be on streaming undercut the tentpole's box office potential and promoted piracy. Because what happens usually is that because these movies are available, first of all, in theaters, if somebody tried to pirate the movies, they can't really do it with a film. But once you have it on streaming, somebody could go ahead and screen capture the entire damn movie, and they just prop it up somewhere, and people can watch the whole movie without even buying Disney Plus. Because of that, there was a stunning 41% drop for people going to see the movie the second week. So it didn't do as well. As a matter of fact, let me look what the numbers were compared to the week before, the weekend box office numbers. And what it was Black Widow, after getting, almost $100 million in revenue for the first week, it went down to $25 million. It dropped 68%. And they're still in all those movie theaters. But yeah, it dropped almost 70%. Meanwhile, other movies, if they dropped off, okay, Fast F9, it's been out for 4 weeks. You know, it's been a considerable drop, but still, they're making $7 million. I'm trying to see some other movies that came out second week. Well, there wasn't anybody else that came out a second week to go ahead and compare that with. So it was a mistake. And this is what was going to happen. This is the kind of, obstacle the theaters were going to have because all these streaming companies decided, well, we the pandemic, we need to go ahead and, make our money somewhere. We're not going to trust the theaters to come back all together. Yeah, they're going to make the argument, Delta variant, mask mandates, not all the theaters are back up and open. Got it. But they were making some good money. And it dropped a lot. And it's one of the biggest drops ever for a Marvel title. And the worst among the Marvel Cinematic Universe films released by Disney. But also this happened with the same thing for most movies during the pandemic era. They've also suffered huge drop-offs because they were also streaming. Available for streaming later after, or same time simultaneous, and they just decided to do that. So. And by the way, Disney didn't want to make any push about what they were doing when it came to putting the movie out. They were talking about they had premiere access numbers, how many people actually watched Black Widow and how much they probably made as a result from streaming. Because through Sunday, the global box office total for Black Widow was $264 million, and more than $324 million, including revenue from Disney Plus Premier Access, so $80 million. But now they don't want to be putting that out there because the theater's going to get pissed. And will they do something to make the cut with them? And I get it with Disney. I know. They're not going to make all that money themselves. But even with the cut they had to give to the movie theaters, they were going to do much better. But they chose not to. Okay, one other story I want to bring up here before we wrap things up in the music end is the idea of decentralization. So going blockchain, crypto, and DeFi and all that good stuff. So somebody wrote a story, Bruno Guez, the CEO and founder of Revelator, a digital asset and blockchain-based distribution platform for creative intellectual property. He wrote a story for Music Business Worldwide about how to have the music industry fully decentralize music. Now, he says here that blockchain or Web3 or whatever we want to call decentralized technology is at a crossroads, along with other tech-related related tech like cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens, has matured dramatically. Music blockchain companies so far have struggled to succeed, even as they promise and occasionally deliver real creativity and efficiency in areas where the music industry desperately needs it. The reason for this is clear. There's a huge tension between what the current music industry needs and what decentralized systems can do. The music industry's main value flows from its ability to control creative intellectual property, and there's essentially centralized activity. We need to be clear-eyed about what needs to happen to create a truly robust, multifaceted, decentralized ecosystem for music. And he goes to the whole story about this thing. So he also says then, things would look simpler if we examine things from the creator's side. They need to register their copyright and their creative works on the blockchain. But then you have to figure out who's going to pay for this technology and who would maintain it until it can maintain itself in a fully decentralized fashion. Similar to the way the Music Modernization Act set up the collective funding of the MLC in the U.S., you could argue that a global copyright consortium of 240 CMOs or validators could come together and fund and launch this new decentralized registration system. A music creator or rights holder would want all the digital streaming platforms and music-related services and apps to be connected to this network so that these services can make payments directly to rights holders, according to the ownership structure embedded in the smart contracts on these copyrighted works. So, direct payment to the rights holders or direct payment to the artists is what they're probably saying. What it looks like it reads for me right here. It's a very... a pretty complicated story, but I would just take a look at that themselves. Hey, the idea of finding other ways creatively to digitally disrupt the established media, whether it's music, movies, TV, and radio, that's what we focused on right here. Now, as I wrap things up, you would think that with what Netflix is trying to do, that maybe I should go ahead and be a little more open-minded about it, because they are opening the door for things. Well, I just don't want them to do things where they're going to go ahead and stretch themselves out and then their major product suffers. So then money being towards the video game portion, the podcast portions, or other things they want to do to set their mobile app together, if some of that money gets taken away from the content they're doing, and then that suffers. And then the other streaming media outlets will then take over for that. That's the kind of thing I would be worrying about. People are so caught up on Netflix. Do we want to see Netflix do some things where if they start keeping their eye off the ball and they start to suffer? I mean, Netflix already has the domination. Why not try to do what they can to continue that? That's just where I'm coming from with that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. That's it for the Broadcasters Podcast tonight. Thank you for listening in, catching it as you always do. I appreciate all of you to listen to this program on a regular basis. And until next week, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.